All right. They're not going to tell us. Weird. Okay. Well, you know what? You know, Ralph Nader's an example. Ross Perot's an example. Teddy Roosevelt is an example. Teddy Roosevelt actually got some votes. He got some electoral votes. And why does it work that way? The two-party system creates a bias on the part of the voter to think that they're wasting their vote if they vote for a third party, and also the petition, the system for which you get on the ballot, it's much more difficult. It's basically automatic for a Republican or a Democrat, but for a third party, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get on the ballot. It's difficult to do, and it's difficult to get the media to pay attention to you. All right, Congress and the budget, the independent politician. Congress and the budget, the independent politician. Let's see what he means by that. Why are congresspersons so independent? 4 reasons. They represent themselves and their constituents, not their political party. They do not have to support the government in power. They are separate but equal partners in the political system. A vote against the government does not bring about a collapse of government like it does in countries that use a proportional representation multi-party system. So the U.S. government can continue day-to-day operations even if they don't really do anything besides just make sure the trains run on time. Political parties do not control nominations for office, so they cannot control the individual legislators. So they are independent politicians. Congressional powers. Congress has the power to initiate, modify, approve, or reject legislation in a variety of political areas defined by their expressed and implied powers, and I guess their inherent powers too. They share supervision of administrative agencies with the presidency. They build consensus among legislators and constituents.
So
Congress can educate. They can oversee the bureaucracies with their oversight powers. Oversee, oversight. All right, that was hard. They can investigate. They have the investigatory power. They can form a committee, an investigatory committee, like the committee, the House Committee on Un-American Activities, HUAC, with McCarthy. Well, McCarthy had his Senate thing. Then you had the House Committee, right? And so they ran, chasing after communists.
He doesn't know how to count.
Was that?
He doesn't know how to count.
He's just watched too much Monty Python. House initiates what kind of bills?
Revenue.
Revenue bills, appropriations and authorization bills. Yeah, and that's like on almost every exam.
Yeah.
Okay? Hint, hint for the person in the room who hadn't taken it. Yeah. House initiates those. The Senate does not. And just because the Office of Management and Budget sets up budget plans and the White House looks at them, and of course told the Office of Management and Budget kind of what they wanted, even though the White House is developing a budget plan through its agencies, that's not a bill. So they're not initiating revenue bills. They're just coming up with budget plans they hope influence how the bill gets initiated by the House. Okay? The Senate confirms, ratifies executive decisions. The confirmation power over judicial and executive, top-level executive appointments and treaties, ratifying treaties, right? President negotiates treaties, but they don't matter if the Senate doesn't accept them. And that happened with, the classic example is Woodrow Wilson and the UN, the League of Nations treaty thing, and Senate was like, nope, we're not going to give up any American sovereignty to some foreign body. Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 17 are the express powers. Clause 18 is where you have the implied powers, okay, which is called Necessary and Proper Clause. Oh, this is a good PowerPoint. This is one of the first ones you'll find, too, if you do that Google search. AP Government Review, file type, :PPT. So you can get this without my words. McCullough versus Maryland, the bank. Okay? So we've already talked about this under constitutional underpinning, so I just won't. I'll just move on. Gibbons versus Ogden, the steamboat licenses, establishes the Commerce Clause and the Supremacy Clause, means, you can't have a state monopoly on interstate commerce. States cannot interfere with congressional attempts to regulate interstate commerce. This led to what kind of legislation in the 1960s? Civil tax legislation, like the Hart versus Hart of Atlanta Hotel case, where the federal government said, no, you don't get to discriminate against African Americans because that would hurt business and commerce, which is a bit of a stretch if you think about it, but that's how far and broad they've interpreted interstate commerce. I don't mind because, you know, I don't like discrimination. But I wish there'd been some other way they could have done it. It's kind of sad when you have to stretch the Commerce Clause to get there. All right, constitutional requirements. House, Senate, age, 25 years of age to be a member of the House, 30 to be in the Senate. You have to be a citizen for 7 years in the House, 9 years to be in the Senate. Residency, you got to be a state resident. The district residency, that's not really true. You don't have to be a resident of the district you represent. You have to be a resident of the state. However, you don't really get elected if you don't actually have a residency in that district. It's just kind of an informal requirement. Native born, no, that's just for presidents. Members, there are 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. There are tables in your book covering all this stuff, I bet. And if not, that little booklet I gave you for high school learning, that's got them in there, I guarantee you. I guarantee it. All right. Occupation. There are lots of business people in the House, lots of lawyers in the Senate. There are lots of business people in the Senate and lots of lawyers in the House. But this guy's trying to make an argument that it's more business-centered in the House and more lawyer-centered in the Senate. Okay? I know there are lots of lawyers and business guys in both, and maybe he's making a good argument. I haven't fixated on that. I don't think the AP exam will either. Women. This is, I think, he's talking about the 78? Yeah, the 108th Congress is what he's talking about. So you get an idea, 78 in the House, 14 in the Senate. I haven't checked the numbers recently. It seems to be growing still. Since both houses possess decentralized power bases, congresspersons engage in substantive representation, which is representing the interests of groups. The congressional goal, and that's versus the other kind of representation where you literally are one of the group. Okay, congressional goal. Get elected, stay elected. Incumbency is you're already in, and it makes it easier for you to stay in because as party partisanship declines, it helps you. You have name recognition. You're a proven winner, which means you'll get more money. It's easier to raise money. And you've also had the opportunity to make people in your district happy by bringing federal money in or by doing casework, which is when you actually do little favors for the people in your district or your state by helping them, signing off and helping them get into military academy or helping them get their Social Security problems fixed quickly, that kind of stuff, cutting through red tape for them. Safe districts prevail. 90% of representatives in the 1980s got reelected by 60% of the vote, 50% for senators. Marginal districts claim only 55% or less of the votes. In 2004 elections, 90% of incumbents got reelected. So most districts are safe. What makes an incumbent so hard to beat? Like I said, name recognition, visibility, credit claiming, casework, pork barrel, which is when you bring in the money from the federal government, position taking, meeting roll call votes, weak opponents, basically because they don't have the visibility and the credit claiming power. How are incumbents vulnerable? Scandals, reapportionment. You know, when their district suddenly isn't their district anymore. Like when you have to redistrict and suddenly two guys who are incumbents are facing against each other. And that happens pretty much every time there's a realignment and somebody loses out. Gerrymandering, drawing districts to favor one party over another. A very big issue in the last 10, 15 years in Texas as Republicans seized control and started working on gerrymandering. Yes?
I thought that was illegal or something else, like some kind of case made that illegal.
Some gerrymandering is illegal. Racial gerrymandering is illegal. And gerrymandering that violates certain rules, like the districts have to be compact. They have to be contiguous. You can't split up a district. It has to be all one thing. And it's got to be, it can't be this like long, super curly thing, right? It's supposed to be kind of squarish or circle-ish as much as possible, but because of population density, it will sometimes look kind of weird. And that's because of the nature of one man, one vote. Each district needs to have roughly the same number of people in the district for everybody's vote to count the same way. Okay? Majority-minority districts give minority advantages in electing minorities. But what court case made majority-minority gerrymandering unconstitutional? Shaw versus Reno. So Reno was the Attorney General back when Clinton was president. So that gives you an idea of the time period. And if you don't know who Janet Reno is, I suggest you watch old Saturday Night Live stuff from the 90s because they made fun of her a lot. Because she was kind of, I don't know a nice way to say this, she was mannish. She looked like she could play football. Okay? Shaw versus Reno, however, the Supreme Court claimed redistricting in North Carolina was unconstitutional. All right? And they were specifically doing this, designing the district to get minorities elected to be represented from their state. You can't do it the other way either. Okay? It just kind of accidentally happens a lot. You have to be more obvious to be able to racially gerrymander to help minorities. It's a little less obvious the other way around. A collection of making policy, a collection of generalists making policy on specific topics. If one needs to know how to vote on a bill, who do you ask? A committee person for advice. House, protecting the masses. Who is the traffic cop on legislation? The House Rules Committee. It controls the flow of bills, establishes a rule for each bill, which schedules it. So they're the ones who can really kind of choke off the ability to get a bill for consideration to get a law passed. Tremendous power. Leadership. Who's the top person? Speaker of the House. The only office mandated by the Constitution who selects, party caucus selects. And guess what? The Speaker of the House is the most powerful member of Congress. Who is the Speaker of the House right now? Anybody know?
I know his face. But in my head.
John Boehner.
John Boehner.
Okay? And you hear him a lot more than you hear about any other Republican who's actually in government right now, right? That's why. He's the most powerful Republican right now. At least he should be. He's been having trouble because he wants to compromise a little more than most of the Republican congresspersons want him to.
Hey, who's the top person in the Senate? That was a question.
In the Senate, no, that was not the question. The question was who's most powerful in Congress.
Oh.
Okay, and a lot of people picked a Senate guy, and it's the Speaker of the House is the most powerful in Congress. In the Senate, it would be the Senate Majority Leader. So party caucus selects 4 powers. Preside over the House. Help determine third in line for presidential succession. Committee assignments are influenced by the Speaker of the House. Appoint the Rules Committee members. Okay, so this Rules Committee, that is this choke point, is greatly influenced by the Speaker of the House. And, a slide I can't read. He can kill some bills or something like that. If I remember correctly, he has a little control over what gets considered. That's sad. We'll move on. Senate, leadership. Vice President, President of the Senate. Okay, so the Vice President is President of the Senate, which means that he's the guy with the gavel. When he decides to show up, he usually doesn't show up to do it. He'll show up basically, why? Because he can break a tie vote. It does happen. Majority Leader is selected by whom? The Congressional Party Caucus that is in the majority. And the Minority Leader for the ones that are in the minority. And then their helpers to try to get other members of their party to vote in line with the party are the party whips. So there's a less difficult system in the Senate because it's a smaller group. So there's less formal power for someone like the Speaker of the House or the Rules Committee to use to choke things off, which means the Senate Majority Leader doesn't have quite the power to basically keep things from happening that the Speaker of the House has. When you have the power to keep things from happening, you have the power to make things happen. Because then you can wheel and deal. Well, you want X, I want Y. You don't get X if I don't get Y. Committees, what types? Legislation and oversight. Standing committees have separate subject matter and they're around all the time. Joint committees. These are House and Senate committees that share membership, things like over taxation. Conference committees. They're formed when there is a Senate bill and a House bill, and they aren't exactly the same, but they're over the same issue. And they form a conference committee, which is a joint committee that gets together to make a bill that kind of is a combination of the two. And then it'll get considered back in the House and the Senate, and it's usually an up or down vote. Either you like it or you don't, and it either passes or it doesn't. Select committees. They exist for a specific reason. This is where those investigatory committees come up, like the one that's investigating right now over the Benghazi thing, and the one that's investigating the Boston thing. I'm sure the Boston thing's getting done too. Committees also perform oversight if and when a bill ever becomes a law to make sure that the law is being carried out by the bureaucracy the way it's supposed to, the executive branch. Committee chairpersons, how are they selected? Through a party caucus. Seniority prevails, but majority caucuses now can choose chairpersons. So what do? They manage legislation through the bill-making process. Caucuses versus party leadership. Legislators band together under ideological flags. There's the Black Caucus for African American congressional members. There's a pro-life caucus, a pro-choice caucus, a gun control caucus. And it's just literally groups of congresspersons who agree on something or have a similar interest in something. Law question. Legislation must go through an arduous process before a bill becomes a law. It describes 3 stages where a bill may be eliminated in the legislative lawmaking process. Of the 3 described in A, explain which one contributes to the most bills being eliminated. So we got to come up 3 ways bills can get eliminated, and the one where it happens most of the time. House Rules Committee. What else? Okay. Yeah, we got to look into that, don't we? Okay. What else? I'm too tired for me to really explain it. There's something else. Before it gets to the House Rules Committee, who considers it? Before it gets to the House Rules Committee, that went to a specific committee, right?
Okay, yeah.
Well, the House Rules Committee actually assigns it to committee. Or does the Speaker of the House assign it to a committee? What if the Speaker of the House, does he have to assign it to a committee?
What about Ways and Means?
Ways and Means, that has to do with money.
Okay.
Let's see. Explain 2 factors indicating how partisanship is involved in the success or failure of developing legislation. Okay, let's see if they give the answer. There are 15 ways. Answers may vary, but for example, 90% of legislation is terminated in the committee process. Divided government within the legislature leads to filibusters, and party line voting is high on roll call votes. So there are lots of ways for a bill to get stopped. All right? Yeah, party line voting in commerce. But those particular ways had to do with divided government. That was part of the question. Yeah?
Can I think of partisanship like participation?
Like party.
Okay.
Party partisanship.
Okay.
A partisan is someone who has a group that they are affiliated with.
Okay.
It's even a term used for people who were in parts of Europe that the Nazis took over that refused to surrender and fought basically as guerrilla fighters. The French underground, they were partisans. Bill becoming a law. Who can introduce a bill? You, the legislator, president, bureaucracy? It's the legislator. Speaker or Senate Majority Leader does what? They title the bill, they number it. Goes off to committee action, the subcommittee schedules hearings, revises it, approves it, or they can kill it. So subcommittee can kill it. Committee schedules hearings, revises it, approves it, or kill it. Committee can kill it. House Rules Committee schedules it for floor action. They can make it closed rule to limit debate and limit amendments, or they can make it open rule where amendments are allowed. They can use a restrictive rule which allows for selective amendments but not others. If you don't like what the House Rules Committee is doing, they're not allowing it to come out for consideration, you can try to get a discharge petition, which requires a lot of votes. It's very hard to do, but that brings it to the floor and bypasses the House Rules Committee. Speaker can initiate it, by the way. Ooh, see, Speaker could choose not to initiate. Speaker has a lot of ways to not let a bill get there, right? Suspend the rules to floor for vote. The Senate, who schedules debate? The House Majority Leader. Well, no, Senate Majority Leader. Okay. Amendments are open for any case. Amendments are open. Why did he put an oops in there? Why didn't he just not have that?
And personality.
Yeah, personality. Yeah. All right. For action, committee of the whole. Where are they? Where is it found? It is 100 or more members of the House can debate bills. No riders can be added. With a quorum call, you have to have 218 House members to vote. A majority passes the legislation. Senate can add what to legislation? Riders. If the Senate and/or House disagree, the bill goes to a select committee. Nope, a conference committee. Full House and full Senate vote on conference committee version. I think he's just distracting us. All right.
What are riders? Do we know that?
Riders. Those are amendments to the bill that may have absolutely nothing to do with what the bill's about.
Okay.
It's like, you know, it's a bill for agriculture, and someone adds a little thing where there's going to be $40,000 spent on some memorial that's in his state. All right? And if you have enough riders on a bill, it's called a Christmas tree bill, because they're like little ornaments on the bill.
So like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, is there riders in there?
Yeah, the thing he was fighting over was something that they slipped into the bill, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't really necessarily part of the overall purpose of the bill.
Still education.
Absolutely. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is really an excellent movie. And you can watch it on YouTube for free. To President for signature or his veto. So the President can kill the bill too. Poor Bill. Passing legislation, appeasing the chief legislator. Chief legislator is the president. Okay? Party influence, 50% of the time legislators will vote party line. House partisanship is stronger than the Senate. Why? Because they're getting elected every 2 years. Who do legislators attempt to please? Constituency support. Legislators are seen as trustees and instructed delegates or politicos. Okay, so usually your constituency, if it's something they feel very strongly about, they want you to vote exactly as they do. They want you to be an instructed delegate. But if they don't care about it, they expect you to use your leadership. And if you're voting in a way that irritates their neighbor, they're not too worried about that. They want you to be a trustee. Okay? So what happens is, what most legislators are politicos, which is if they think it will affect them getting elected in a negative way, they will be an instructed delegate. They're going to vote the way the people want them to vote if they think it matters for getting reelected. If it doesn't matter to their constituency, then they will use their own opinion, more often than not. Or they'll do what makes the party happy to get a little favor out of it. All right, and there you go. And they try to appease special interest groups and lobbyists. Like we talked about the gun control thing, and obviously appeasing the NRA was more important than the overall majority of people. Why? Because the NRA feels very strongly about gun control registration, and most people like the idea, but they're not going to vote somebody out if they don't vote for it. That's where we're at. Federal money tree, the annual assessment of government expenditures and assets. The budget, government collects money via and spends via taxes and spends it via expenditures. If tax allocations are higher, it's an entitlement. Surplus. Why is he doing that? That's bad teaching. Okay, I wish I'd known he was doing that. I would not have used him. Don't know where he got the idea this would be good. Yeah, if you have more taxes coming in than expenditures, it's a surplus. Yeah. And we have very rarely had that. And sometimes when they claim we've had it, it's an accounting trick. We haven't really had it. Okay, because they're not counting something as an expenditure when it is.
Did you not have it during Thomas Jefferson?
I don't know the exactly when we had surpluses way back when. I know in the 90s we had an accounting surplus that was either a true surplus or pretty close. And that was because we cut back on spending in the military and we had a huge economic growth due to the computer industry just exploding. Okay? And we cut some spending besides military stuff. I mean, we changed welfare and made it cheaper for the federal government. By the way, state taxes kind of were going up during that time period, and the federal taxes were going down. So everybody's like, oh, we finally got this under control. We just kind of switched it a little bit. Okay, if expenses are higher than taxes coming in, it's a deficit. Okay? No, this guy is confused. Ignore that. If expenses are higher than revenue coming in, it is a deficit, an annual deficit, and you add them together and it's a national debt. Wow, he was doing it again. That's stupid. I know what he's trying to do in class. You know, he's sitting there and he's messing with his kids to see if they're paying attention. But even then, it's not a good idea. It is a bad way to teach.
Well, remember the slide during the test.
Have you ever noticed when I go over a multiple choice question and we're going over the answer, I always go with the right answer. Sometimes you're looking for the wrong answer, right? So when we're looking for the exception, I give you the letter on that and I tell you what the right answer, all those other answers are, because that's as far as the verbiage I want in your brain, I want the real answer.
Right.
I don't want you to hear the wrong answer and get that stuck in your head. I don't want to distract you. He thinks he's keeping his kids focused, and he's distracting them. And he distracted us for the last few minutes because we've been griping about it. All right, $11.2 trillion shortfall, of which 10% of the current budget pays just the interest. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, well, we can't because we don't know when the last bit of the slide pops up. Federal income, number one source is income taxes, thanks to the 16th Amendment. Tax people through the IRS, 50%. Corporate tax, income tax is 10%. They used to be very close to each other at one time. And weirdly enough, our economy was better. And I guess I got a little political there, didn't I? All right, social insurance, FICA. The withholding taxes, those things that are, everybody basically has the same amount withdrawn from their check based on how big their check is, right? The percentage doesn't go up if you have a bigger check. And that's to pay for things like Social Security and those things. And strangely enough, it's a flat tax that people are always ignoring when they're trying to flatten the income tax, the individual income tax. They don't realize we have a lot of flat taxes we're paying. All right, so little weird thing. Borrowing. The debt load shifts the burden to future taxpayers, provokes thoughts of a balanced budget amendment with certain provisions. And where do we have lost federal income? Federal tax loopholes, which your book called tax expenditures, remember? And the grand deduction, tax breaks, tax expenditures, yes. So he used the word too. Yay. And he didn't distract us. Federal expenditures, the top three. Social Security. Social Security and Medicare, 1/3 of the budget. I kind of like that one though. National defense and interest on the debt. The budget process is based on what idea? How much should I get next year? Which means incrementalism, the idea that we're going to get a little more than we've had this year. Discretionary expenditures. Increase last year's budget by an increment to satisfy this year's budget. Your budget proposal goes to whom? The Office of Management and Budget. And uncontrollable expenditures are 2/3 of the budget. Last time I looked, interest on the debt was about 20%. So that means 20% of the taxes you're paying, income tax at least, well, no, taxes. Taxes is just basically paying for stuff you already did. You're not getting anything out of it other than not defaulting. Okay, so uncontrolled expenditures, you qualify, you get them no matter what the cost of the government, even if all the funds are depleted. So where does the budget process begin? Federal agencies submit their requests to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, who consolidate requests and then give them to the President, who then puts together the budget and delivers it through the State of the Union. And you know his Council of Economic Advisors, which is part of the Executive Office of the President, is involved, right? Congress then holds hearings with the standing committees and finally approves the budget, or the 13 appropriations bills in the President's. Finds them. All right, budget reform. Instead of just thinking we will only spend so much, Congress has established reforms to improve the process. In 1974, they fixed the budget calendar and established a budget committee. They set up the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, to make sure that the president's OMB wasn't lying to him, basically. And the 1974 reforms, the budget resolution established in April, sets the bottom line. Budget reconciliation. You can change appropriations to reflect proposed savings. Authorization bills set program spending limits. Appropriation bills show me the money. Funds programs based on an authorization bill. It can't go higher, but can give lower amounts than the authorization bill. So it's one of those things. You're not really getting the money yet with an authorization bill. You're getting permission to spend some money, but you haven't been given the money yet. Appropriations bill then decides how much within that range you get.
That makes so much more sense in the book. That's where the book confused me.
Yeah, the book, all these books, they all have problems. This book tries too hard, so sometimes it gets you confused. The Wilson book is that I used to use is very efficient and says just exactly what they need you to hear, but sometimes the vocabulary is above the head of a high school student, high school teacher, some high school teachers. So, that's what happens. Social policy. What are the two types of social welfare? He's kind of mixed policy in with some of this stuff, so we'll just kind of hit some of it real quick. Two types of social welfare: student scholarships and grants. No. Social insurance, transfer payments, benefits given by the government to individuals, cash payouts, Social Security entitlements, also referred to as social insurance programs. You play, also known as unemployment insurance and disability, that kind of stuff. In-kind transfers, food stamps, low-interest college loans. Public assistance program funded by tax revenues and available only to the needy through a means test. So one must prove they need welfare. You have to prove that, you need temporary assistance because your family's needy, basically. And you have 5 years you can qualify. You have to find work within 2 years, though. Unmarried teen mothers must stay in school and live with a parent or guardian. Mothers must identify delinquent fathers. Which program does the public view more favorably? Means tested or social insurance programs? Why? Answer, social insurance programs are entitled because you pay into it. Means tested are often viewed as throwing money at a problem, not necessarily fixing the problem. The hilarious thing, of course, is that most of this money is spent on people who are in the middle class or upper class. And people forget that the reason why we spent it to begin with on poor people was because it was kind of good for everybody, because it stopped certain bad things from happening that benefit everyone for them not to happen. But we tend to forget that. It's not like poor people just disappear because you don't give them a check. Then what do? Well, they get creative about how to make money. And sometimes that's not necessarily a positive way. Education works, but enforcement is difficult with the caseload and the thought of reducing government costs. Education, the Horatio Alger approach of bettering oneself through school, is a popular and expensive notion. In fact, the quality of education depends significantly on the wealth of the community in which a child resides. So if you're in a poor community, your school is probably not performing as well. And by the way, the data out recently shows that the testing system we have today has not done a thing to change that. In fact, according to the data I've read, it's made it worse. Weirdly enough, all those expensive, high-priced prep schools that kids end up going to Harvard and Yale, they're not worried about all this testing. They're not going crazy over testing. They're doing what they used to do. Largest state, what they're doing what we used to do, only not as well as they did it, and they're still doing it better than we would do it anyway. But, you get what I'm getting at. It helps when you have kids who pay attention and get in trouble if they don't. Largest state budget allocation is education, but parents want results. School choice lets schools compete. Voucher system, these are the reforms that they're pushing that have never really been done in America before, and we don't know if they're going to work, but everybody who's pushing them thinks that it's just an obvious fact that it will. Court-ruled states can give parents vouchers for private access to schools. Zellman versus Simmons-Harris. Purpose of No Child Left Behind is to integrate public schools via bus. No, that was Mecklenburg. Set national standards for math and reading. Race to the top, that's Obama's. It's kind of NCLB Part Two. Political scientists, this is the Congress essay. Political scientists often note that Congress is too responsive to constituents and especially to organized interests, while others argue that Congress is too insulated from ordinary citizens. Identify an organized interest and explain what characteristics the interest may possess so Congress would address its needs. Describe how Congress can insulate itself from its constituents and provide an example to support your claim. Explain how Congress can overcome organized interests and better meet the needs of its constituents. All right, so size, education, money, lobby, how do organized interests get established? I don't like the way he explains that. I was thinking in terms of, interest groups and things like that. Yeah, I don't know what he's getting at here. Prioritize agenda, what happens, what do these groups, how do they get influenced? They can decide the agenda. Wow. This just seems like a bunch of, he's not, this is incoherent.
I don't remember the questions now.
Yeah. Well, it's basically how organized interest groups influence legislators and what influences legislators. Maybe he's trying to get at how they're independent and so on. Maybe we should just zip through these real quick and not worry about the answers, and you guys can stare at them later. If you look on YouTube. But you guys probably will just go hit your other test materials. Practice Essay 2, the framers of the United States Constitution created a legislative system that is bicameral. However, it is not just bicameral. The framers also established two houses distinctly different in character and authority. Explain two reasons why the framers created a bicameral legislature. Well, one we know has to do with issues of representation. Another idea was what? To further limit government, right? Because both have to agree. So that's a further check on government running roughshod over people. Identify one power unique to the House of Representatives. Explain why the framers gave the House the power.
Appropriations.
Yeah, revenue bills originate in the House. Why?
Because they represent the population better than the Senate.
They are more accountable to their constituency because they are elected every 2 years and because they have a smaller constituency. Identify one power unique to the Senate and explain why the framers gave the Senate that power. What's that? What's that, Venus? No? What can the Senate do that the House cannot? But that's not a power. That's just that's a procedure. Yeah. What? Well, they can make amendments over there in the House too. I don't know why you said it that way. What? Ratify treaties, confirm appointments. Why would the Senate do that and not the House?
Because it was elected by the parties.
Well, originally they were appointed by the states, by the state legislatures. The idea is that they are more level-headed and long-term thinkers than the House. They'll be more responsible. Okay, hey, we're on the presidency, so if we're getting there. I know you got to go, but I'm just saying on YouTube you might. This is probably gonna have to go on YouTube in installments, so I'll try to label it because I can't imagine uploading a 4-hour
4 or 5 hours.
yeah video.
Okay,
It'll-
we'll start off the presidency.
I will break it down on the stuff that I'm gonna go in reverse order. Yeah, but not we're not gonna get to civil rights and policy.
Alright.
I think I'm killing you guys. I'm killing me too. Okay. He's a sadist and a masochist. All right. President and federal bureaucracy. Which article sets the stage for executive power to be vested in a president? 2. Remember the order of the Constitution. The most important branch, they thought these were co-equal branches, but really not. They wanted Congress to be the most powerful, and that's why they talked about it in Article 1. Then they talked about Article 2. And they talked for the presidency, and then they talked Article 3 for the judiciary. And that tells you which ones they thought were most important, what order. And then you get the weird stuff, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right. So here we go, Article 2. So what does Article 6 do, Supremacy Clause? Yeah, we know that. All right. Constitutional requirements for someone to be elected president. You have to be 35 or older, a natural-born citizen, and remember that it hasn't been decided whether jus sanguinis counts, in other words, by the blood. It could mean you have to literally be born on American soil. They might decide, if it ever comes up, that if your parents were both citizens, maybe. But, I mean, that's the whole issue with Obama. Was he born on American soil? And the answer, unless you're a real stubborn wingnut, is yes. All right? You have to be a really crazy conspiracy theorist if you actually know the facts to believe that there's any chance he wasn't born in America. And 14 years of residency. Okay? It's not enough to have been born in the country. You have to have lived 14 years in the country.
So if you were born in base somewhere, that would count.
If you're born on base, that's U.S. soil for legal purposes. As I understand it. That's what I was told when I lived on base. All right? So I hope they're right. Term limits. There wasn't a term limit for a long time. Then there was a term limit. Anybody remember the amendment?
Yeah,
2-2. 22nd Amendment. 2 terms plus 2. 2 terms plus 2 what? Years. Right? Because the way it works is if you're vice president and the president resigns or kicks the bucket, and you serve not a majority of his term, so you could serve exactly 2 years. I guess, I don't know if they count by days or seconds or whatever, but you could get that 2 years in and it wouldn't count toward your term limit. And then you could do 2 4-year term limits. So actually, technically, you can be president for 10 years, but serve only 2 full terms. Disability of the president turns to the 25th Amendment and the succession process, which goes president, vice president, Speaker of the House, Senate pro tem, President pro tem, and then it goes to the cabinet agencies, cabinet departments, and it goes STD and J, and then a bunch more. But that's probably as far as you'll have to know for the AP exam. If not, I'm going to be really irritated with them. But STD and J is State, Treasury, Defense, and then Justice. Technically, State, Treasury, and Defense were created at the same time, but they created a kind of a legal fiction that State was created before Treasury, before Defense, and the rest are in the order of creation. Justice was created after those 3, and then it goes all the way down, finally to Homeland Security.
that would have to be a mass assassination.
Right, but there's a reason why one member of the cabinet will always not be at the State of the Union address, because if something really horrible were to happen, that person would become president. And back when we had a Secretary of State who could not actually qualify for a president, she never got to be behind, and hide, because she would get bypassed. So she didn't get to have the duty where they hide in a bunker while everybody else is in a building. All right? Okay. Disability that goes to if the president can no longer perform their job. A majority of the cabinet and the vice president can gang up on him and make him go. It's kind of like the Star Trek thing where Spock or Kirk is always saying the other one can't be captain or something else because of some reason, and gets a bunch of people to vote with them, and then the other one gets kicked out. Okay, so that's the way I always think about it, because for some reason Star Trek does that a lot, and they even did it in the movie they put out recently. So, popularly elected. Sometimes there are accidental presidents. The most accidental, of course, would be Ford, because he wasn't ever elected. The vice president under Nixon resigned before Nixon resigned, so Nixon needed a vice president, and they brought in Ford because of the way the system works. And then Nixon resigned, so Ford never got elected and became president of the United States. All right. Formal powers, domestic. Power of the purse. Nope, that's Congress. But the president is chief legislator, has the State of the Union address, can advise on legislation, has the power to approve a bill or veto it. So technically, the president is the most powerful person in making laws, but not bills. He's very weak when it comes to making bills, but he's very powerful in making laws. That's kind of the way I look at it. Chief executive has administrative powers, enforce the laws, select government officials with Senate approval. That's one of those checks. Run the bureaucracy. Oh, the president's veto is a check. Run the bureaucracy through executive orders, the take care clause in Article 2. Has judicial powers, reprieves, can do reprieves on sentencing, pardons, can commute sentences of federal felons. Can't do this with state. Okay, this is federal stuff. And nominate federal judges with Senate majority confirmation. That's a lot of judicial power if you think about it. Formal foreign policy powers. National security is commander-in-chief, also head of state, so he receives ambassadors, others heads of state. and chief diplomat negotiating treaties. Informal powers, the presidential precedent, Washington turning to a cabinet for advice. That cabinet thing's not in the Constitution. The cabinet thing did exist as a practice in other governments in Europe, but so it's not this weird, like, ooh, Washington came up with something just out of nowhere. It's been around. Actions of Congress, giving presidential power to fight a war, basically, thanks to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution 1965. And this kind of was repeated when Bush was given a blank check to deal with Iraq the way he wanted to, right? How does this happen? Well, in the last few decades, Congress's occasionally events have happened, and to basically, I guess, intimidate other countries. They say, hey, Prez, you can go beat up on them anytime you feel like it. We're going to sign off on it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then you get the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act was kind of a response from Congress saying, wait a minute here. We gave you all this license to do what you wished, and then you kind of did things that we're going to pretend you lied to us, which I'm sure the presidents in the Vietnam era were kind of misleading people and misleading some members of Congress, but I'm sure some members of Congress had a pretty good idea what was going on. However, the War Powers Act was designed to limit the power of the president to make war. Even though Congress declares war, the ability to make troops do things is definitely the president's power. So the president has, for a long time, had the ability to basically fight a war without it being declared. The War Powers Act is designed to make that not happen, and we don't know how the Supreme Court would rule on it. So what it has done is created a bluff, and what goes on is the president doesn't just go crazy using military forces whenever he feels like, because he doesn't want that to find out he's wrong about the War Powers Act. But at the same time, Congress doesn't want to test it too far either, because if it gets tested, one side's going to suddenly have a whole lot of freedom to do whatever they want. And neither side wants to lose what they have. So they're just both agreeing not to. I guess it'd be kind of like if you have a sibling and you both want something very different from each other, and you kind of up with a compromise because you know if you took it to mom and dad, one of you would win and one of you would lose completely. I guess is the way I'm going to explain it here. All right, media's use of the bully pulpit. President goes directly to the people when they do this. Clinton in 1997, there was a budget freeze. He got on the news and basically blamed Congress, and Congress got blamed. A lot of people blamed the Republicans for the budget freeze, and kind of similar to what we've experienced recently, and really kind of worse than what we experienced recently. Executive orders can be formal or informal. The vice president is a heartbeat away. What are his qualifications? Same as president. Okay, what roles does the vice president sometimes take? Political professional. Kind of helps deal with the congressional gridlock, at least in the Senate. Or is this how they get there? I don't know exactly what he's getting at with the slide, but yeah, they tend to be someone who is a political professional and someone who is a party man. If you're a party rebel, chances are you're not going to get nominated. So Bush and Gore both chose to be, Bush competed, and we're talking about the first Bush. First Bush, Bush 41, ran against Reagan the first time Reagan won, and then Reagan picked him as his running mate. And then Reagan ran again. Bush didn't run the second time, and then Bush 41 ran after Reagan had served his 2 terms and got 1 term in. Gore kind of did the same thing with Bill Clinton and didn't win because of the way the electoral vote was set up and didn't quite mirror popular vote, and because of Bush v. Gore. Which amendment changed how vice presidents were selected? The 12th Amendment. Why? Because originally you voted twice. The electoral voters voted twice. They voted for 2 people, and there was a tie between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. And as we all know, Hamilton got the Federalists to go for Jefferson instead of Burr because Burr was someone he considered to be irresponsible, and then they fought a duel, and Burr killed Hamilton and ran off to form an empire in what was then the American Southwest. And that didn't work out because one of the people that he talked to, military men that he talked to help him do this, was a young officer by the name of Andrew Jackson, who snitched him out to Washington. I kid you not, that's what happened. All right. History sometimes does read like fiction. Cabinet positions. How many cabinet positions? 14 secretaries and the Attorney General. All must be confirmed by the Senate. Responsibilities to execute presidential and congressional orders, basically. More presidential than in congressional. Requirements. They have to support the president. They're usually partisan selections. And EOB. What is its function? More advisors for domestic and foreign policy, in theory partisan, in reality civil servants who stay as president moves on. Office heads appointed and confirmed by the Senate. The NSC, I think that's supposed to be a P, Executive Office of the President. The National Security Council is a crisis management thing. It's a liaison to the military and CIA. The President uses the NSC to communicate to the military and the CIA, is basically what happens. The CEA, Council of Economic Advisors, yeah, that's supposed to be a P, definitely. Council of Economic Advisors basically helps the President figure out what his economic policy should be. Of course, he picks economic advisors who already kind of agree with him in principle. The Office of Managing Budget, Presidential Budget Oversight, watches Congress bureaucracy tries to help him develop his plan and gets all the information for him to develop his plan. Partisan followers, the White House organization. Partisan followers whose sole function is to support the president. If not, find another job. This is the White House office. And these are the White House officers. These are the guys in the West Wing. You know, feel free to go watch an episode of West Wing on YouTube. They actually have a few. And you get a feel for it. You know, like the White House press secretary, the chief of staff. They work literally in the White House. That's where they work. They are the people who allow the president to do what he does. They tell him what's going on in the various departments and all that kind of stuff. And that's important here when it says oversee the political and policy interests of the president. Political. They're not just, you know, government bureaucrats. They're there to help that president get reelected or to help the president's long-term policies continue forever. No Senate confirmations here. Other bureaucrats filled by federal employees, 85% unless they're truly specialists in a given field like lawyers or business people. Their party identification is not really that relevant. It's the way they do a lot of this is to make sure that all the special interest groups have some representation. How to get others to follow a president. The act of persuasion. The Constitution is vague on what a president can do, so great leaders get creative. Their powers are enhanced by having a national constituency. The more people in the nation like the president, the more powerful the president is, because the more likely you get in trouble if you're in Congress and disagree with the president. Ceremonial head of state and party, at least in the first term. This can erode if one's party deserts you or others compete in the primaries against you. It's tough to beat an incumbent. And I'll give you an example of this. Jimmy Carter faced a lot of resistance from his own party. A lot of the so-called inability that he had really had a lot to do with the fact that it was hard for him to get his party, much less the Republican Party, to do what he wanted. And that's because he was president right after Ford, who was the guy who got to be president because Nixon was bad. And Ford was identified with bad Nixon, and people are mad at the presidency and mad at presidents, and Jimmy Carter comes in and he's the president, and we're not going to let you act like Nixon did, and they kind of overcorrected in a lot of ways. Regardless of your political point, I'm not saying that Carter's ideas were good or bad. I'm saying that he couldn't get a lot of them done because there was a great deal of resistance from his own party because of this really nasty view they had of presidents at the time. Who does the president have to appease? Washington, D.C. political pundits? You get about 100 days to show your stuff, and then all of those political pundits on the talk shows and in the political magazines, they give you a grade. And they start talking about you. Even members of your own party in government might talk about you. After Bush's 100 days, not only were the political magazines, Bush 43, not only were they criticizing him, but even the Senate Majority Leader, who was a Republican, was complaining about his style of governance. And he didn't get a pass until 9/11. When 9/11 happened, then his own party backed off him, the other party backed off him, and all the political pundits backed off of him because there was a need to be unified against the threat. It was and that allowed him to become a powerful president, because what he had been doing in the first 100 days looked to me like, I'm just predicting what would have happened if there hadn't been a 9/11. I suspect he would have been a one-term president because he was ticking off members of his own party. They were still annoyed, I'm sure, by how he conducted business. However, he had a national constituency, so Senate Republicans and House Republicans just had to put up with his style, whether they liked it or not. Partisan grassroots. If you are a president, you are chief of party. I don't know what to be a good Republican has to do with. Joe Public, use the polls to your advantage. TV spots are what you make of them. When you are hot, your legislation flows. Your fellow party people get reelected. Kind of the coattail effect, which is not what it used to be. You're a chief legislator in name only. The power share with Congress, but you get to shape policy, you get to consult Congress, you can bargain with them, and you can appeal to partisans. Yeah, right. And you can also try to shape public opinion against Congress if they're trying to do stuff you don't like. Yeah. Disapprovals, veto. It takes what? How many of the House and Senators to override? In each House, by the way? 2/3 of Congress to override. A lot of things pop up here, right? 2/3, 3/4. You know, cloture rule is 60.
I like how they don't do like 56, 60 or something like that.
Well, yeah, yeah. What's the day limit, or it's a law if he doesn't sign it? After 10 days, if Congress has not adjourned, it becomes law. If Congress has adjourned after submitting a bill to the president and he doesn't sign it, If they've adjourned within 10 days, then it's a pocket veto. The pocket veto, of course, makes things extra complicated. But it's really simple. It all comes down to, is Congress still in session or not after 10 days? Okay? You understand veto. You understand signing. So if you just, all we're really worried about with a pocket veto is, are they in session? If they're not in session after 10 days, then it's not a law. If they are, then it's a law without the president's signature. Okay? That's all it is. But it just messes with people. Messes with them, because there's more than one moving part in that, so to speak. All right, line item veto. State governors, some state governors have this that eliminate portions of bill. It's usually designed to change dollar amounts, as in the amount of spending. And they tried to do this back in the 90s with Bill Clinton, so that he would have the ability to basically balance the budget after the fact and kind of help. It would help kind of, I think, if I understand it correctly, kill some pork barrel and stuff like that. However, City of New York didn't like one of the things he wanted to cut using his line item veto power. They challenged it, and it was ruled unconstitutional. You know, and the Supreme Court, it wasn't ruled unconstitutional because the Supreme Court liked it or didn't like it. It's because it really is not something that is allowed by the description of how things work in the Constitution. Which means if you want to do a line item veto for a president, you need to go ahead and amend the Constitution to allow that.
That's going to be a big, long.
Yeah, amendments don't happen too often. Party and the presidential agenda. Party support. 2/3 of the time, party discipline prevails, but lack of consensus on policies and diversity of constituents can hurt it. In other words, sometimes it's really hard for the president to get somebody in Congress to go his way. Congresspersons have to follow their constituents first. Presidents don't get them elected. Their constituents do. If their constituents like the president's idea or the president, then it's easier to cooperate. But if the constituents are going to punish you if you follow the president, it's hard to do it even if you're in the same party. Off-year elections are not popular times for presidents, except for Clinton in '98 and Bush 43 in 2002 because of 9/11. In 2006, it was a more normal thing, and in 2010, it was the off-year election cycle worked the way it normally does, which is the president's party loses membership. Although it wasn't as bad as the Democrats were fearing. Because what the Democrats had feared in 2010 was losing both houses. And Obama facing, the Republican parties in control of the House and the Senate across the board. Public approval gives leverage to presidents, but not a commanding influence. And it's one thing, when you see Obama making lots of speeches, it's usually because there's a law he's trying to get passed about that time when he's doing that. And that's the way they all work. Does one pursue a number of issues like Clinton did, or do you concentrate on just a few issues to try to hammer through Congress like Reagan did? Foreign policy. Some presidents have created kind of by their own agenda. Some inherit a foreign policy from past presidents. It seems likely that Obama would never have gone into Iraq. But once he became president and we were in Iraq, he did a lot of the same things that Bush did. Because he had to. Because we were kind of stuck doing it that way. And that happens to a lot of presidents. And then there's the issue of, for a president, what do you focus in on? Are you going to focus in on what's going on in the country more, or foreign policy more? And then you get in, like, economics are so intertwined with the world, globalization, it's getting harder to figure out what the separation is there. Okay, so remember, he's chief diplomat, and that means he has a lot of foreign policy power. He has the power to extend or terminate diplomatic recognition. And that's not something the Senate can do anything about. If the president says, I'm not talking to you, North Korea, there's not a thing that the Senate can do about it. Gets to negotiate treaties, but the 2/3 of the Senate have to confirm the treaty. Can make executive agreements with other governments as long as they don't violate treaties. And yeah, he doesn't have to wait for Congress to fire the nukes. That's a pretty big-time foreign policy power. Commander-in-Chief, Cold War versus Hot War. You think about how that works. You know, back when we had the threat of the Soviet Union, how is being Commander-in-Chief being applied now that we are in a war against terrorism, which is a lot like fighting fires. Okay, I wish people understood that better. we're going to have more terrorist acts in the country. We just try to minimize them, just like we try to keep the number of forest fires and house fires to a minimum. It's unrealistic to think we're going to get rid of fire, just like it's unrealistic to think we're going to get rid of idiots who want to hurt other people. Okay, going to war without declaring war is something presidents can do, and we talked about what the limits of that might be with the War Powers Act. Police actions include Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Iraq. Although I think one time we declared war on Iraq. I think that was the Gulf War. Yeah, the Desert Storm stuff. We actually did declare war. Foreign policy history, isolationism. Monroe Doctrine established the idea of kind of we're over here, and those European guys, and then those Asian guys and African guys are over there, right? That's kind of how it was, and so. But we kind of extended the idea of the home front, like there's America, and then there's all the rest of the American continental countries that we kind of have a little bit of say over in a condescending, paternalistic way. Yeah. All right. World War I, we went over there, but then we wanted to be isolated, even though the president saw a need for a League of Nations and for us to be a little more active. He got overruled. And then World War II and Cold War meant that we were the policemen of the world, at least for the free side and for the non-free side that wasn't communist. And we beat Germany, Japan. There was a power vacuum, and we did not want the Russians to be the one who filled all of it. We tried to establish a containment policy to keep communism from expanding, and that led to throwing money to countries so that their economy would be good enough that radicalization wouldn't happen, and also lots of American military bases permanently placed overseas. So you have the Greece situation, the Turkey situation early on, where communists tried to take over, and that's what got us really going on the Marshall Plan. And then that's why we fought in Vietnam. That's why we had bases all over Western Europe. That's why we established NATO before the Warsaw Pact was formed. Oftentimes, whether we like to admit it or not, the Russians were kind of reacting to what we were doing more so than we were reacting to their aggression. Not that I'm saying we were doing the wrong thing, because I'm pretty sure based on history that the communist Soviet Union was more than happy to be aggressive if they had felt like they had the edge. It's what we were trying to not let them have. And then we had the issue at home of McCarthyism, looking for communist infiltration. And the complicated thing is there actually was some communist infiltration. It's just McCarthy way, way abused and exploited the situation to do all sorts of horrible things. The era of détente, the lessening of tensions, trying to reduce the number of nuclear warheads in the 70s after the 60s madness. So if you see SALT talks or START talks, we don't have time to go into what those are, but those are nuclear reduction policies. Okay? So you might want to look those up. And then you got Reagan. I like how he does this. Reagan's Star Wars initiative, which broke the Soviets in the sense that they didn't know what to do. I don't think the Star Wars initiative broke them. I think what broke them was a combination of their failed invasion of Afghanistan. That sound familiar? And the fact that they were trying to spend on their military to keep up with us, and we kept on making more nukes. We didn't get Star Wars off the ground. We still don't have a massive satellite anti-missile system. We threatened them with it, but really it was just they couldn't keep building tanks and planes and nuclear missiles enough to keep up with the numbers we were churning out. And their economy was getting worse and worse. And then they lost in Afghanistan. And the people did not have faith in government. And the lines were getting longer to get toilet paper. And if you're used to having toilet paper and you can't get more, you're a miserable, angry person. Just think about it, but don't think about too much. Oh, by the way, what was I going to say? I had something I just covered, and I wanted to go into it a little bit more. It was before the nuclear policy, SALT talks, START talks. Oh, well. Soviet Union crumbles. China is creating a capitalist economy and claiming to still be communist. They're not free, but they're not really communist. They can claim they are all they want to. They're an oligarchy. That's what they are. Eastern Europe, an oligarchy with a lot of capitalism, at least where it matters. Eastern Europe throws off the yoke of communism. The Soviet Union is liberated. The wall falls, 1989. And then here comes the terrorists. Even though we already had terrorists. That's something that at your age, I hope you understand. There were plenty of terrorist attacks going on before that. You had the Munich Olympics. You had the explosion of marine housing, marine barracks in Beirut in the early 80s. I mean, this stuff has been going on for quite a while. There's always crazy. In the last 60, 70 years, there's always been crazy in the Middle East. All right. Terrorism, well, actually longer than that, but it didn't make big news because it was really limited in scope. Terrorism is the next target, Kuwait. And a multilateral coalition freed Kuwait from Iraq. That was what, Bush 41. did. His argument is, hey, I'm going to use coalition building, get a lot of people to agree, and then go do this thing. Bush 43 was kind of like, hey, we don't need everybody to go along with this. We'll just do it ourselves. And argued that Iraq was part of his axis of evil, along with Iran and North Korea. And so multilateral means getting a lot of other countries on board. Unilateral means we're going to go alone, or nearly alone. We had a lot of support, by the way, of going into Afghanistan. We had much less support to go into Iraq. Why? Because Afghanistan directly was obviously aiding and abetting al-Qaeda when they attacked us, and there was no obvious, and there really wasn't a connection between al-Qaeda and Iraq because Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party was an opponent of al-Qaeda. However, the real argument to make, whether it's right or not, is that Saddam Hussein had the capability of doing everything al-Qaeda did and doing it much better, frankly, because he had more resources. And that's spooky. And I think some of us got a little nervous seeing what happened with the World Trade Center and knowing that Saddam Hussein is a wingnut and that he's a much more powerful wingnut than Osama bin Laden. And I guess a lot of us just didn't want that guy around just because we didn't want to find out he was willing to do the kinds of things Osama bin Laden did. He'd already tried to assassinate a former president of the United States, Bush 41. All right, here we go. 3 instruments of foreign policy. I'm not saying that that's the way to think. I'm just saying that's the way a lot of people thought about it, is why they were okay with Iraq. 3 instruments of foreign policy. 1, economic sanctions, embargoes, trade. The idea is that, you're going to starve them out. You're going to make life difficult on them without hurting them. Military. Go in there, bomb them, take over, whatever. Coalition building, get a lot of organizations, international organizations in other countries to say, hey, stop it or else. We'll do one of those other 2 options. All right, so who gets involved in this? The President, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the National Security Council, Congress. The President can dispatch troops for 60 days without congressional approval. Then it's the War Powers Resolution, which presidents have not accepted, frankly. They have not accepted as constitution. but they try not to push it too far because they don't want to find out they're wrong. Domestically, the president can veto legislation. Congress can also prevent presidential actions. The legislative veto, president can't put actions into place until a 30 to 90-day waiting period. Congress submits a resolution to deny the presidential action. That's unconstitutional. They cannot do that. They try to use it as a threat to control the bureaucracy, but you know, that's, yeah. Legislative vetoes are unconstitutional. That's the important thing to remember. Because literally what it is they're saying we have the power to tell you not to engage in the powers the Constitution said you had. Right? So that's the problem with the legislative veto. And the War Powers Resolution, parts of it are basically kind of a legislative veto. That's the trick. How do you sink that in? The power, Congress's power to declare war, what does that really mean? You know, the president has a very narrow view of it. You know, which is they just have the power to stamp their approval on a military action. But the president argues that he has the freedom to do whatever military action he feels like. Okay, Congress can pull back funding if the president doesn't spend the allocation. What is that called? Impoundment of funds. Does the president have to spend all he gets? In the Budget Reform Act of 1974, it kind of said you don't get to spend what you don't have, but you have to spend this money. I mean, one thing Nixon was doing was he wasn't spending all the money allocated to certain things because he didn't like those programs. All right. Foreign policy. War Powers Act 1973 must notify Congress, but does he need their approval? Interesting. We don't know for sure. Impeachment. The House may charge the president by majority vote for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Submit articles of impeachment to the Senate. So when you are impeached, you are not found guilty. You are found likely to be guilty. You're found to be in a state where you need to be tried. Okay? It's an indictment. It is not a conviction. When we say 2 presidents have been impeached, okay, they have not been convicted. Impeachment, and so many people in this country do not understand that. Senate, which holds the trial with the Chief Justice and presiding judge, 2/3 of the Senate votes to convict. That's a supermajority vote, and it hasn't happened.